Boy, I'm thinking about a lot of stuff here, and I'm thinking about corporatism, the collaboration of the state and corporations in the management of society, which a lot of my listeners know is and was the economic basis of fascism. And it was also the economic basis of the New Deal in the United States. And we all know this, but we choose to ignore it. But so that has always been thought of, and I've always thought of it as the heads of the major industries sitting down at a table with members of the government. And this is exactly what happened in Italy and Germany and the United States in the 1930s, and decide what the prices should be in that industry and what the wages should be in that industry and what they should produce and how much of it, et cetera. But it sounds to me like you're adding another many different factions to this collaboration, right? And I think you're dead right. And I think the sort of intellectual elite part of it is crucial, right? Not just the scientists, but the social scientists. In fact, they're probably even more important, because the Council on Foreign Relations was journalists. It was founded by journalists, all of whom had deep connections and long-standing friendships with heads of government. By the way, do you know the original Council on Foreign Relations headquarters in Manhattan was a townhouse? It was there for 60 years or so. Do you know what the townhouse, right? So it's connected to the next house over. Do you know what the next house over was? In other words, whose house did they share a wall with? It was the house
I'm sure I knew this at some point, but you're going to have to refresh my memory.
This is everything right here. It was the house that was owned by Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah.
On East 65th Street. You guys can look it up. Yeah, everyone can look it up. But there you go. I mean, they shared a wall with the Roosevelts. Okay, right before the Roosevelts took power. By the way, it was in the 20s and 30s when they were neighbors. So yeah, but yes, there is this collaboration among various elite groups, not just the state and big corporations, right? That constitute, what Marxists would call the ruling class. I'm fine with that too, by the way. Yeah. Other people call it the ruling elite, whatever you want to call it. That's really important. And that's
yes, it is. And yeah, just to circle back to what we talked about earlier with that potentially apocryphal David Rockefeller quote, ha ha ha, I don't want to take a demotion, but there is something to that the Rockefeller family achieved incredible power and influence, not through, well, with the exception of Nelson, but even then I was vice presidential, but not through political office, but through philanthropy, which is this bizarre. What is that? That's not corporate. It's not state. It's granted by the state as a sort of privilege to these philanthropic foundations to act in tax exempt ways, etc. That was invested by the Reese Committee in the 1950s. That's a whole other thing. But so what is that? And that, of course, serves as a template for someone like Bill Gates, who takes his vast fortune and I'm going to give it away, the giving pledge, etc. Oh, I'm such a benevolent human being who has doubled his fortune in the past decade of vaccines, as he himself termed it in 2010. There's something profoundly important about that speaks to that nebulous nature of this. It is not necessarily corporate. It is not necessarily state. It's the combination of those in various ways. And I don't think looking at it from one or other of those perspectives is particularly helpful.
I think we're on the same wavelength here, but the one partner in the partnership could put everybody else in prison and no one else could, right? I mean, the state could have put Rockefeller in prison. They could have killed Rockefeller, right? They could have ignored Rockefeller. They could have not joined with him. I mean, and Rockefeller can't do the same to the state. So
well, that's true, because the state is not an actual entity. It's a thing, but it's composed of human beings who themselves are compromised in various ways, presumably.
But the state sure needed Rockefeller's oil, didn't it? Right? And so, he had quite a bit of power in those negotiations, if there was.
Well, exactly right. And so where do these politicians come from, and how are they groomed and processed? And why do we have in the United States, for example, this two-party system that cannot be challenged, that the candidates must come up through the, I mean, again, we get into so many different topics here. I will parenthetically also exhort, this is just a bibliography of my own work, essentially, but I will exhort people, if they're interested in what you talked about earlier, the importance of social scientists and their place in this. I'll point them back to History is Written by the Winners, which was a podcast follow-up that I did to my World War I conspiracy documentary, talking specifically about how the teaching of history in the United States was taken over by the philanthropic foundations and their affiliated institutions in the post World War I era, essentially, as a way of essentially gaining control of the apparatus of the what would become the State Department, etc., through getting the minds of the most promising young up and comers in the academy, essentially.
Yeah.